Welcome to Engaging Culture, a podcast presented by Bridgeway Christian Church. I'm Brian Kiley. Today, Pastor Lance Hahn and I are joined by Dan Gamel and Lane Gibbs, both of whom serve with Prison Care, Bridgeway's prison ministry. On this episode, we'll be talking about Prison Care's work in the prison and jails in our region and about how the church can care for the incarcerated, the formerly incarcerated, and their families. All of that and more on this episode of Engaging Culture. Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to Season 3, Episode 10 of the Engaging Culture podcast. Brian Kiley, joined, as always, by the Lance Hahn.
Yes, I am here, everyone. Do not worry. I'm right here.
Do not fear.
Yes.
We are joined by two friends of ours.
Yep.
Lance, why don't you introduce them?
Yes, I love these guys. Quite frankly, I just like the idea that we get to hang out with them. Whether or not this podcast and episode is the most boring you've ever heard, these guys are amazing. So we have Lane Gibbs right here. Lane, say hi to everyone, please. Hello. So Lane Gibbs is one of our elders here at Bridgeway, and he is involved, obviously, in this ministry, and he's involved in Kids Way ministry, and he's involved with men's ministry, and he's involved. So he's
Lane,
one of those guys.
Can you start pulling your weight, please?
Yeah, exactly, right?
Yeah,
Slacker.
so when you always talk about the church is run by like 20% of people, 18% of those people is Lane Gibbs. There you go. So
couldn't have said it better myself.
Amen. We also have Dan Gamel, which always makes it feel like you want to say Dan Gamel, but that's the RV guy. So we want Dan Gamel, and he... if you want to talk about somebody with a passionate heart towards something, someone that is brokenhearted for the hurting and the lost, if you want to talk about someone that kind of oozes kind of a Jesus vibe, that would be Dan Gamel. So, Dan, you can say hi to us as well. Don't be afraid.
Hello.
Well done.
Well done.
Excellent.
All I can hear is the Dan Gamble jingle in my head.
I know.
Thanks for that.
I know. So, Dan, you are so awesome. So thank you for being here, both of you gentlemen. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
Yeah, this is going to be fun, obviously, about a super important topic. Prison ministry is a big deal. The prison system impacts, I think, a lot more people than maybe a lot of us realize, and we're going to talk through a lot of that stuff today. But first, maybe would love just to get kind of briefly to hear from the two of you, why prison ministry? Obviously, nobody questions its importance, but there's a lot of places that you could serve, a lot of things you could do. Dan, we'll start with you. What kind of stirred your heart to get involved in prison ministry?
Well, first I want to thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to share today. Prison ministries are not common in churches these days, and if they've ever been common. But we have a church here at Bridgeway Christian Church that is unlike any other, that supports a prison ministry. And it starts with our senior pastor, Lance Hahn, having a heart for people, a heart for the broken,
Amen.
A heart for and a heart to say that the blood of Jesus covers everything, that there is no sin that God can't cover.
Amen.
As it says in the word, from east as to west. So I thank God for this opportunity that God has given us to have a prison ministry here at Bridgeway. And thank God for you, Pastor Brian. I know Pastor Lance has come out on our ministry to our juvenile hall outreaches. Pastor Brian, you came out to an Easter outreach, and how can I not start without thanking our wonderful brother here, Chaplain Lane Gibbs, a wonderful brother. Go back 10 years. I could still remember. It's like here we are today, 10, 11 years later, when we were talking at the Starbucks and trying to figure out what are we going to do? How do we put this prison ministry together? Yeah. What does it mean? And I also want to give a shout out to Trevor for all the times that he came to Starbucks and was patient while we taught prison ministry.
That's
so
my
thank
son.
you, Trevor. So my interest in prison ministry, I guess it goes back to really Psalm 68, which is that God is the father to the fatherless.
Yeah.
This speaks closely to my heart and how I came to know God. And as a social worker, it was part of my job to see the youth wherever they would go or end up. And I had a situation in the early 2000s where one of the young people on my caseload was committed a crime and was was placed at the Sacramento County Boys Ranch.
Okay.
And as a part of my job, it was to go and visit him in my role as a social worker. Well, when I went out there, the first time I went out there, what I saw broke my heart. It was young men that were broken, young men without hope, just completely lost. And God just got a hold of my heart right then And I knew right then there's something more that I could do. And so I began that process of reaching out to the chaplain and at the jail, and then going through the process and becoming a chaplain. So then I became a chaplain there at the Sacramento Boys Ranch, and that was about in the early 2000s, about 18 years ago.
Wow.
That's awesome.
That is awesome. And just to reiterate what Pastor Lance said earlier, if you don't know Dan's passion for prison ministry, there are very few things in this world that I am as passionate about as Dan is about, and it truly, it's an inspiration. So I mean, I'm grateful for not only your service, but just the infectious and joyful way that you communicate about the importance of prison ministry. It's pretty awesome. So,
Thank you, Pastor Brian. I remember in 2011 when we were in the other building, or is it 2010, at one of our ministry interests. For our prison care. You were there, Pastor Brian, and you were not the Pastor Brian at that time. You were just attending Bridgeway, but from the early start, from the get-go, from the jump, you were there, and I appreciate that very much.
Yeah, hey, my pleasure. Amen. So, Lane, let's hear your story a little bit. Everyone's got a story how they connect with prison ministry. Tell us a little bit about yours.
Mine's a little bit of a personal nature, so I'll try to keep it brief. So in the mid-'90s, when I was in my mid-20s, I got arrested for dealing drugs, and I spent about 3 years of my life sort of in and out of jail and in and out of the court system and all the fun and joy that goes with that. But along the way, I had some good chaplains that came into the jail that I was at, and they did some ministry there that impacted me. And when I got out, a few years in the future, right, about 5 years after I got out, I was attending Bridgeway and just sharing my story with some guys, and somebody said, hey, you should think about being a chaplain. It really was not on my radar, right? Yeah. I was just looking to sweep that under the rug. Don't tell anybody about it. And all of a sudden, I got a conviction from the Holy Spirit when that guy said that. And the rest is history. I reached out to the local chaplains here, and I've got 3 felonies. So there was not a very high chance that I was going to get allowed to go back into the prison system. But within 2 weeks, miraculously, I was cleared to go in, and been there about 10 years ever since. So
praise God.
Yeah.
Now, I have to say something, because there's a lot of our listeners that don't know Lane personally, which I would suggest that if anybody is feeling lonely, they need to connect with these 2 men, because these are the 2 coolest guys in the entire world. But here's the thing. If you meet Lane, there is 0 residual of this guy's old life. It's super weird. So he and I are really, really close friends, and our families are close friends, and we go back a long way. How long have you been at Bridgeway?
18 years.
18 years. So I mean, I've been here 22 years, so a majority of that was with me and Lane. Yeah. Well, I just have to tell you that it is so hard to picture any of his story and attach it to him, because he is the most normal guy, and you're like, wait, what? Drugs? What are you talking about?
I never get that.
It is so funny because and he is the prime example of the redemption of Christ that follows a story where Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego go through the fire. Remember, they go into the fiery furnace because they were obviously shoved in there. When they come out, it says they didn't even have a smell of smoke on their clothes. That it's the idea that he walked through fire, and the redemption is so powerful that I can't even catch a hint of his whole life on him. So once again, I mean, he's been leading our church for all these years, and he's been an elder for a super long time. He has been a power player. So once again, what Dan was referring to as far as the East is from the West and redemption and power, this is living testimony right here in front of me that I get to see all the time as my good friend. So
praise God for all that.
Glory to God.
Yep.
Praise
Amen,
God.
amen.
So good.
All right, so we could easily, I think, spend this entire hour talking about everything that Bridgeway Prison Care does, because it is constantly amazing to me. It's like I feel like I know everything, and then I'll sit in a meeting with you, Dan, or something, and I'll hear about this new huge project you've started. I'm like, holy cow! So can you just give us a sense of what are some of the ways that prison care serves both individuals who are in the prison system and then also their families?
Well, it's all about hope. It's about hope. It's been said that we can live 40 days without water. Or excuse me, no.
Wow.
That's a long time.
That's a long time.
No, we can't.
I think it's 40
we can
days
live
without
40
food.
days without food,
Yeah.
4 days without water,
There you go.
4 minutes without air, but not a minute without hope.
Oh.
And our prison ministry is about hope.
Yeah.
Webster's defines hope as confidence in a future. And so the heart of Bridgeway Prison Ministry is giving hope for a future, hope to say that God is control, hope to say that there is a possibility for redemption, that God can restore. And so through that, Lane and I serve as prison ministry. We serve as chaplains at the Placer County Jail. We have ministries on the inside where we go in. We bring teams in, like I was sharing when we started the podcast, and where we go in to the juvenile hall, the Sacramento County Juvenile Hall Max Unit, where I serve as a chaplain right now. We go in and we bring Easter to them. We bring services. We bring food to them. We also minister behind the walls where we're leading our Bible studies, building disciples in our Bible studies. We also have ministries that are outside the jail. And one of the things that, as God touched my heart, is that the families of those that are incarcerated are overlooked. They're just completely forgotten. I can remember pulling up to the Sacramento County Boys Ranch and waiting to go in, and there would be a sea of cars in the parking lot. And these were all the families that were sitting and waiting to go see those that were incarcerated. And I saw brokenness all over. So one of the things we wanted to do at Bridgeway is say to the family that you're not alone.
Yeah.
And so we started a family support group, and this is for the families and the loved ones of those that are incarcerated. This gives them an opportunity to come together, to have somewhere where they can not feel shame, that they could feel hope, and that they can get help in navigating the incarceration system. You know, there's so many things to navigate. I just printed up here some of the regulations. These are Title 15 regulations. They regulate everything from who can visit, how can they visit, what can they have in the jail, all those kinds of things. So we try to help them along those lines.
And for those of you listening, Dan was holding up quite a stack of paper.
Yes, sorry.
You're listening. You
Looks
can't,
very intense.
You're listening. You can't see it, but trust
the
us.
Title
when
15.
It's a lot of.
It's another set of documents I will not read.
I would imagine. I mean, having a family member in the prison system, I would imagine, can be a very isolating experience.
Very.
And yet what you're able to do is bring families together into an environment where they're not the one who has a family member in the system now. It's no, we all do, and we're all here to support each other. I mean, I have to imagine that's really powerful for those families to see that they're not alone.
Oh, absolutely.
Extremely powerful. We have a family that comes over 150 miles round trip for our family support meetings.
Wow.
Or one way.
Oh my gosh.
And it's amazing. I can remember going down and meeting her after I met her. We talked on the phone, and I said, text me when you get here for our family support meeting. I went down. It was a hot summer day, and when I went down, I came around the side. I saw that she had children. I opened up her little car, and I was overwhelmed with the smell of McDonald's and heat and poop and everything and sweat and just the travel that this lady came to get support. And it's something that's very vital that we as a church, we need to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
What do people need to know? Lane, we'll go to you here for a second. What do people need to know about God's heart for the incarcerated? Because I think you can say this about a lot of different segments of society.
Sure.
For those of us who don't have a lot of experience with the prison system and all of that, it's just the unfortunate reality is it's way too easy for us to ignore, which is not a good thing, obviously. Yeah. What do we need to understand about God's heart for the incarcerated?
It's going to sound a little cliche, but I mean, he doesn't view them or their life or their sin any differently than he does the four of us sitting here today,
Amen.
right? I mean, we're all walking through sin each and every day, and God deals with us on different levels each and every day. He's long-suffering, compassionate, and kind, thank the Lord, right? But sometimes he brings, judgment, and these guys are no different than you and I and the four of us sitting here today, right? They're just walking through sin, and God happened to bring judgment on them in a different way than he does for us each and every day. And they're just walking through that. They're no different. Their sin is not viewed any differently than ours is to God.
Right.
And we should therefore obviously treat them the same as we would any other brother walking or sister walking into the church seeking help and restoration. They should be viewed the same way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's good.
Let me just add into that, because I think that the stigma that surrounds incarceration and the families, because once again, the stigma slime hits them. Oh, your husband's incarcerated. Like,
That's
suddenly
right.
that means something about them.
That's right.
And they're like, wait, your dad incarcerated. Like, now what? You have the cooties,
Right.
This whole idea of a stigma. I want to remind everybody, think back through all the stuff that you've done in your life that you didn't get caught for.
Yeah.
How many times have you sped and did not get a ticket.
Yeah.
Right? So let's add all those up.
Yep.
If you have that many speeding tickets, you are incarcerated.
Yeah.
I'm just telling
Yeah.
you right now.
Yeah.
The other thing is sometimes there's the issue of manslaughter. Sometimes there's the issue of accidental negligence. Sometimes there's a lot of things that incarcerate people, and we always kind of put everyone into one category. Well, you're incarcerated because you're a bad person.
Yeah.
Well, hold on. We're all bad people. Some
right.
got incarcerated.
That's right.
You know what I mean?
That's right.
And the idea of saying that when you go in to minister, you're not going to minister to a different sort of person.
Yeah.
You're just going in to minister to people.
Yeah.
They happen to be in a different location and do not have the freedoms that you do.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not giving an excuse
Right.
for the things on what people do,
Yeah,
including
absolutely.
me.
Yeah.
And some of us get caught, and when we have to be incarcerated, that's brutal. I just want to lower the stigma and say when you walk in, I mean, just the idea that you and I are so close, Lane, and that was your reality.
Yeah.
But once again, it doesn't change anything.
No, and I
So-
can tell you that. I mean, I personally walk through that stigma, right? And I still sometimes today, when I share it with certain people, I get that look. They don't know they're giving it to me, but I get that look of, really?
Yes.
And you're leading in Bridgeway? You're an elder at Bridgeway? There's a look of astonishment and shock and
Yeah.
sometimes even a little disgust, even to this day, right?
Wow.
But when you go to share it outside the church is where it becomes really a stigma, right? When you share it, like when I shared it with neighbors, or I shared,
Yes.
or neighbors just found out, right?
Yep.
For whatever reason. You get the stigma attached. Your kids get that stigma attached, like you said, Lance, and it becomes like a marker of shame, right,
Yes.
on you and your family that you just have to process through. And my family's had to walk through a lot of that stuff. So
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Dan, how about you? What else do we need to understand about God's heart for those who are affected by the prison system in some way?
I think we need to understand God's heart in the matter. We look at Jesus. He brought attention to those that are in prison at the beginning of his ministry in Luke 4:18, and then at the end of his ministry in Matthew 25. And so we see that Jesus has a heart for those that are incarcerated. We know that the Old Testament and the New Testament are a catalog of people that have been incarcerated and God has used in mighty ways.
Yeah.
And also, we have to ask ourselves, why is it then that we don't do it? And I think that we have to remember that, prisoners, those in jail, are easily forgotten.
Yeah.
And they're written off as a helpless cause. And that's why I think God loves them so much, because they're the outcast. Because as it says in Mark 2:17, it is not the healthy that need a doctor, but it is the sick. And I have come not to call the righteous, but the sinners.
Yeah.
And so we need to understand that God does not despise the broken. That's
right.
God does not leave the broken.
Yeah.
God loves the broken.
Yeah.
And in fact, he considers, we look at in Matthew 25, in the final exam that Jesus gives in Matthew 25, there's 6 questions on the final exam, and he's talking about prison ministry. I was in prison, and you visited me. And they say, well, when did you do that? When did we see you doing that? And when you did it to the least of these, you did it to me. So we see that God has a heart for the broken. We see that all are equal as well. All stand equal with God. Whether we're wearing orange or we're here today or wherever, we're all equal in God's sight. The sufficiency of the cross travels all the way through humankind. And we need to remember that, God does not give up on those in prison.
Yeah.
And God remembers them.
Yeah.
And we need to remember them. As a church, we need to remember them. As a body, we need to remember them.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely right.
Yeah, let me just add something to that. Because I think that there are some people that justify an inactivity in prisons because they said, well, in the New Testament, all those guys were in prison for sharing the gospel. It wasn't like we were talking about a whole bunch of criminals. These are believers that because they went against the government were thrown into jail. So they weren't out there committing crimes and hurting people. So that's why he was focusing on making sure to go into prison. But let me remind you of this. The reason why I think prison ministry is so critical is they're not coming to church.
yeah.
Okay, they can't come to church. This whole idea where we design this idea, if you come, you'll be ministered to, there is a physical reason they are not going to come to church. The out of sight, out of mind, suddenly what? Now they don't have anyone coming to minister to them? That's not okay. I mean, think about it this way. If you want to talk about different ministries, I think there's certain ministries in the church that are hard, that are a difficult harvest, and there's some that are easy harvest.
Yeah.
I think, like, for example, if you want to see people saved, you want to be in kids ministry because statistics show most kids are the ones that come to receive Christ.
Right.
But the other thing is, if you want to see transformation, Get into prison ministry. And here's why. Because desperation and difficult circumstances, a lot of us have committed crimes and we've excused them and moved on.
Right.
They can't do that. They're reminded every day of something. It brings back a desperation, and desperation's where Jesus shines. And so if you want to talk about a harvest where you actually have something that happens when you get a chance to minister to people, man, you might want to consider this.
And honestly, that's what makes that. I always say it to anybody that asks me, it's my favorite small group of the week, right? Is going into the jail. It really is. For the reason that Lance mentioned. They are hungry, they are desperate, they are open, they are vulnerable for the most part, believe it or not, even though these are hardened criminals in a lot of places, right? They are very vulnerable to what's going on in their life, and they're searching for answers, you know. Unlike some of us, right? When we get in small group, I don't want to tell anybody my junk because they might judge me. These guys just put it on the table, you know, and they look for guidance.
Got 1,000 other escapes that I can go to, whereas in prison or in the jail, it's like, well, here we are. Let's just be
Let's
real
get it out
about
there.
this. No, hey, I mean, that makes sense.
It's the only place you can hear an F-bomb at a Bible study, and it's okay, too. So just want to put that out there. It's kind of interesting.
There you go.
Now letting you and I are in a Bible study
That's not
together.
me. That's not me. But I do hear the F-bomb at a Bible study.
That's funny. So we've talked about this a little bit, but I wonder if there's anything more on this question, just in terms of common misconceptions about people who are in the prison system or have criminal records. What do you guys see, and what are kind of common issues you see in terms of things that we misunderstand, those of us who don't have experience in the system, that we don't understand about those who are affected by the system?
I would say that, I mean, again, it kind of sounds cliche, but for the most part, the majority of the people is because they really didn't have any other option that they were taught. We talk about this in a bunch of different cultures and, you know, racism and all different areas of life, right? We talk about this, so it's a little bit cliche, but it is true. You know, being in there and getting to know a lot of guys and ministering to a lot of guys, you know, when I got out on the other side of it, that's when you really get close and personal with them, you find out that a lot of them just really were groomed to sort of be that way. And I mean, what I mean by that is that's how they were raised. Doesn't mean they didn't have choices along the way. I'm not saying that, and everybody has responsibility, but some of them from an early age were sort of groomed for the lifestyle that they led. And they really didn't know any different. So I wasn't one of those. I had all kinds of options and opportunities. I wanted to be that way, and that's what makes mine kind of more shameful
But I think
than
the
theirs.
judgment that we put out there is say, I would never do that. And you go, well, hold on, you're not in their circumstance.
That's right.
What about you, Dan? Any thoughts on that?
Well, the issue, like Chaplain Lane was talking about, it's a complex issue, really, when we look at the incarcerated. We look at multipolar issues. 80% of those that are incarcerated have a substance issue. 60 or more % have serious mental health issues. Over 70% are fatherless. And this goes back to my heart in Psalm 68. When we look at that, they're fatherless. And then also the recidivism, regrettably, within 3 months of incarceration, over 60% return. That's why it's such an urgent issue to us. But I think also, Pastor Brian, it's an issue in the body of Christ of not understanding forgiveness, not understanding forgiveness on their own self, not understanding what God did on the cross, what has happened at the cross. And I think that if you don't understand forgiveness in your walk with God, then you're going to have a difficult time looking at, say, someone that you could see their outward sin and bringing them, you know, the forgiveness. For, you know, it's like not forgiving. It's like drinking poison and thinking it was hurting the other person. And so we see that. And also, though, today's prisoner is tomorrow's neighbor. And so I think we forget that. We really forget that.
And Lane's neighbors.
There you go. They're like, who's this guy again? What's his address?
So what we see is over 90% of the incarcerated are going to be coming out of incarceration. It's not lock them up and throw away the key and forget them. They're going to come back. They're going to be your neighbor. They're going to be serving you. They're going to be building your home. They're going to be, you know, working on your car. They're going to be doing all kinds of things. So why not give them that love and reach out to them while they're in there? Instead of waiting till they come out, or even, you know, judging them when they come out. Like Lane said, you know, we view one of the things we need to do a better job in the body of Christ is not view, like you were saying, Chaplain Lane, those that are incarcerated with suspicion. We see them, you know, we interact cautiously around them. We find out, oh, you've been in jail, or oh, I see this neck tattoo on you. I see these exterior things, and that's not how God sees us.
I always have such a hard time with, I mean, I'll hear different people say things like, oh, well, I've always kind of kept my nose clean and I've always done the right thing. Kind of lands to your point about, well, no, you just haven't gotten caught. But you hear people say, oh, they don't have compassion for those who are incarcerated because they say, well, hey, I've done my part. I haven't committed crimes and everything else. And I just go back to when I came with you, Dan, to the Max Unit Juvenile Hall a couple of years ago. Yeah. We brought some food. I got to share a little message. It was cool. And then after that, they gave us, it wasn't that much time, maybe 10 or 15 minutes to sit at the table with these young men who were what? Teenagers?
Teenagers.
Yeah. And just to talk to them. And I'm like, okay, if I have 10, 15 minutes with a young man here, like, I just want to listen to him, just be someone. And I remember this kid telling me his story and telling me where he came from. And it's an abbreviated version. I get that. And I'm not saying we're not accountable for our decisions. But I'm listening to the family situation he was in, where he lived, what was going on around him. And I'm thinking, if I was born in that situation, I would have been the exact same way. Like, I mean, I didn't get to pick being born into a stable middle-class family with with two present parents.
Right.
And this kid didn't pick to get born into the position he was in. And again, I'm not saying that that's an excuse for all of our bad behavior, but for those of us who were born into situations that were that maybe predisposed us towards a lower likelihood of committing crimes and things like that, we just need to recognize that a lot of these, men and women, Dan, even referencing the stats you just shared, they're born situations where if it was us, we would have done the exact same thing. And that's where I think this sort of pride of, oh, well, I've always done my part. Now, those that are born into those situations and find a way to overcome it, I mean, complete respect
powerful stories,
to them. Incredibly powerful stories. But I just think we need to be careful, those of us who by no choice of our own, by no effort of our own, for whatever reason, God placed into more stable situations. That has more of an impact than I think we realize.
Yeah, let me just highlight one simple issue. So right now we've been talking in the news about the opioid epidemic. That wealthy people can afford prescriptions. And a lot of wealthy people got hooked on prescriptions. If you don't have the ability to get prescriptions, you get out on the street. That will throw you in jail. So like what you maybe have walked through and done and struggled with, you were allowed to struggle with in a legitimate legal way. Other people didn't even have that chance. They ended up having to go to a different method, which got them into prison. Because a lot of stuff is drugs related. I do want to do one clarification real quick, because I think that a lot of our listeners have not been in jail. So first question, and I'll ask Lane, I'll ask you this question. What's the difference between prison and jail?
Anymore, it's getting less and less, right? I mean, it used to be you couldn't do more than 2 years. I think it was 2 years max in a county jail, which is why I got blessed not to have to go to state prison. But you had to go into state prison if you're any more than 2 years. Now you can go up to 5 years, I think it is, in county jail. So the degree of, I'll call it the level of the inmate is becoming more and more level between state and county jails. But there's still a degree of difference between being incarcerated in a prison system and being incarcerated in a county jail system in terms of the amount, the type of people that you're incarcerated with. I guess that's the easiest way I can say.
So it's usually lower level sentencing in jail?
Lower level sentences, obviously shorter sentences, and to a less degree, not as violent a crimes because that accompanies with a longer jail sentence, right? So you're typically in with lower level crimes, not as dangerous, not that there isn't people in there that have committed crimes and now they're back in on a county charge. I was surrounded by a lot of those guys, right, that had done 20 years in prison, but they're only there because it was their second strike and they stole the bottle of tequila, know, so they're in county jail. So there's both in there, but it's more likely that you're going to be surrounded by, I guess, a little more of a career criminal in a state prison.
The other thing that I want to highlight is what it's like inside. It's not Shawshank Redemption. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's kind of how everybody has this old school feeling where, you walk up and down and there's the keys jingling and there's the bar. I'm not saying that there's not bars, but like, for example, I went into the Max unit for the young kids. You go in there and it's basically looks almost like a hospital, quite frankly. When you're walking up and down the halls, it just seems like you're in a hospital ward. And then all of a sudden, when they come out of their rooms, you realize, well, it's doors. There's no bars. And then there's little windows and stuff like that. But then they come out into a general hall and you basically have all these kids pulled out of their neighborhoods and now they're all wearing similar things. And then they all sit down and you're hanging out and having dinner. The chairs, they're built into the ground. You know what I mean? It's like...
So you can't hit each other.
So you can't hit each other. But other than that, it's shockingly similar to a lot of environments that we're in.
Yeah.
But when you haven't been there, there's this perception of TV.
Yeah.
And it's, the longest yard and, it's all this stuff, this brutal stuff. And you go, well, no, there is some pretty hardcore areas. And when you're going to start getting into some of the tougher things, the prison systems, the max prisons and stuff like that, the SHU down in,
Pelican Bay and all that,
Pelican Bay and all that stuff. Okay, yes, you're right. But a lot of people are incarcerated in environments that they're scary to live in, but they don't look like TV.
Yeah.
So is there anything that you guys can give kind of a little bit more realistic picture about how it is on the inside?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I only spent, I think one of the times I was in was actually behind physical bars, right?
Right.
All other times it was either in a cell, like you said, that has like a regular door and a window on it.
Yeah.
Inside it's not obviously that nice, but it has a regular door and a window, so it feels a little bit normal. But most of the modern jails, like the one down the street from us here at the church, right, South Placer County Jail, when you walk in, it's actually a very nice facility. They have video visits. They have iPads that they can use for specific web browsing, obviously, right?
Right.
For general purposes that can help in their, rehabilitation or whatever, right? But they do have a lot of things that you and I are normally used to on a day-to-day basis. The difference, right, obviously, is the absentee of anybody who loves and cares about you on a daily basis, right? I mean, that's the difference.
And freedom.
That small little thing.
Small little thing. And freedom, right?
Love and freedom.
Yeah.
If you can live without those.
Yeah, you're good, right? But, for most of the guys that I don't know about Dan, but where I minister into, they only get out, I think it's a total of 3 hours a day. So even though they do have that nice, comfortable door that may look, okay, that's not so bad looking, you're stuck in an 8 by 12, right, for 20 hours a day, with somebody who you may or may not get along with, right?
Yes.
So the door may look nice, but behind that door may not be so sweet, right?
Who knows
So
what's going on back there?
Yeah.
The experience is brutal.
Yeah.
But just once again, just visually, it's a little bit different.
Well, and I think that's important for people who are maybe on the fence a little bit about, I'm kind of scared to go in there because I watch all those prison shows on reality TV, and they always pick the worst places, in America to video those programs from. You walk into Placer County Jail, it's very safe, right?
Yes.
I'm just going to say that. I've never one time in the 10 or 12 years I've been serving in prison ministry have I felt uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Have I felt like my life was in jeopardy or even remotely close, right? So
No, and that's certainly an important thing for people to understand, especially when it's a mystery and you haven't been there and you got
sounds scary.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It does sound scary.
Yeah. Dan, can you give us kind of even just a story about when you interact with a kid? Sometimes there's some emotion in there. So I went in, and as a dad, I had a very intriguing reaction to it. And I know that moms also do this. When we have moms go in there with us, they see these kids and you go, oh my goodness, this is a teenager. And you go, what if that's my child? Yeah. So can you kind of, some of these kids, yes, they've done some brutal stuff and everything else, but a lot of them are scared. A lot of them are just troubled. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Has that been your experience?
Yes, it has been my experience But let me just go back to the jail and the bars. The South Placer Jail is unique. It's a silent jail, but if you go up to Auburn Jail, you will see bars and you will see a completely different scenario.
Old school. Yeah.
But there's loss. They're fearful. They put on a tough exterior, tremendously tough exterior. But when you're sitting down with them, when you're praying with them, when you're looking at them, and you see that the tears, and you ask them for a prayer request, and they say, "Pray for my grandma, pray for my mom, pray for my little sister."
Yep.
You see that this is a youth. This is not an adult. This is a youth, and so it's very difficult. It's very hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd love to hear, you guys obviously you're on the front lines of prison ministry. So whether it's a story from stuff that you're personally involved in, or even from just programs or situations that you're aware of, what are some ways that God is working in prison ministry? Lane, you already talked about how it's the most open and honest kind of small group that you're in. And it is pretty cool to hear, just whether it's from the two of you or things I read about in the news or others in our congregation who are involved in prison ministry, in the midst of all of that fear, in the midst of some of that hopelessness, God's doing some cool stuff. So maybe Dan, we'll start with you. Just what are some either things you've experienced or programs you're aware of that where God is working behind the walls?
Well, there's some amazing things happening in prison ministry right now. It's what they call an indigenous ministry, and you see some crazy, wonderful things happen, especially in the South. I'm thinking of a prison in Louisiana, Angola prison. They looked at what can we do to rehabilitate these offenders so that they can go out and be productive. And what they did is they looked at something called moral rehabilitation. And what they did is they partnered with a seminary, New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary. The seminary came in and offered them seminary courses, just transforming the heart. And those are the kind of things that are making a big difference in their life, because it's a heart transformation. It's a heart issue. It's not an issue of I'm not going to do this again. I'm never going to do this again. Yeah. It's an issue of God changing your heart. And I think that the more the church gets into the jails like that, and we need to see more of that here on the West Coast, we have a lot of opportunity, but we're not capitalizing on that opportunity. Going back to what Lane set up in jails, they often have just one opportunity a week for a limited amount of time for their spiritual health. That's not a lot of time. That's not a lot of time. So some of the are going in there and starting seminaries. They're being more intentional. There's God Behind Bars, a ministry that's having church services. There's a church in Texas that has a congregation that is inside the jail. And the pastor joked and said, we're only missing two things. We don't have a children's ministry and a mission ministry. So
I'll volunteer to be sent out.
But the fact is that those ministries are making a tremendous difference, changing lives.
Yeah. Lane, how about you?
I'll make it a little more local and maybe personal because Dan's already touched on some of the regional, larger state issue or program. Right, but here locally, right, even at Bridgeway, we've got a ministry that goes into Folsom Prison. Bill Thomas heads that up, and he takes in a team of I don't even know how many guys now, guys and girls, and they go in and they do hardcore reshaping, recalibrating, manhood. Right, they address that head on and moral recompassing and things like that. But it's a 1 year, I think, and even a 2 year, depending on how long the guy's going to be in there. They spend a year up to 2 years with these guys going through hardcore. I can't remember the name of the program now, but it involves reshaping your manhood, right? Rediscovering what your true identity is in Christ and building out from there and helping them get through some of those struggles of not having a father in their life. And you look like you were going to say something.
Well, no, I'm just trying to think of the name of the program. It's on the tip of my tongue, too.
Authentic Manhood?
Men's Fraternity.
Men's Fraternity. That's it. There you go.
One.
There you go.
I've been through that, not in prison, but I've been through that.
Yeah.
It's a tremendous program. Yeah. And it seems to me that, and again, I'm speaking from ignorance here because my knowledge of what it's like behind bars is minimal. But I mean, the opportunity that exists there to sort of, you have a captive audience and a focused amount of time to train men and women in kind of reframing their thoughts and their hearts, to train up in skills that can be used outside, to just sort of address some of the challenges that led them to where they are.
That's right.
It seems like that's a real opportunity there and a place where the church is somewhat uniquely positioned to really be of benefit to those who are in that position.
Yeah.
And then if you kind of break it down to the next level, right? I mean, when they get out, Dan and I both had experience in this, and so has Bill and others, I'm sure, in the church. It's when they get out, right, and you invest in someone one-on-one. Yeah. That's what really takes that from being something they learned into something that they can actually apply to back into their families and give them real-world demonstration and evidence of how that looks. Like for us in our family, when someone gets out and I choose to invest in them, of course, I use discernment and wisdom.
Sure.
And I bring them into my circle of influence slowly. But for those that I feel like are in a right place to receive that, I engage them wholeheartedly with my family. I've done that.
Yeah.
All my kids have grown up sitting around the dinner table with ex-felons and, ex-convicts, having dinner with us at some point in their lives, right?
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, just to make it personal, I'll just use one example. One of those guys used to go here to Bridgeway, doesn't anymore, but he went to Bridgeway for like 6 or 7 years, got out. We invested in for about a year. He got married. He's got 3 kids, maybe 4 now. I kind of lost track. Lives here in Lincoln, and he got involved in Bridgeway, and he led Bible studies for years here. He led ministries here at Bridgeway for years. This was a guy who had felonies, a list a mile long, and looked like he might not be able to go anywhere. And, with God's love and redemption, and just for somebody, it didn't have to be me, but it just happened to be me, investing in him on a personal nature and making it real for him and showing him what it looked like to be in a loving family. That guy's thriving today, just tearing it up. Yeah, doing great things. things for the kingdom. So
Yeah. Wow. I mean, and just, the power of that sort of investment, helping people turn the corner. God obviously at work in the situation.
Yeah.
It's amazing. It's great stuff.
Yeah.
I want to talk for a minute now about the effect of incarceration on families, because as has been stated by the two of you, incarceration doesn't just affect the individual. Behind each person is some sort of family structure.
Yeah.
Dan, in the work that you're doing with these support groups and everything else, what are some ways that you're seeing incarceration is affecting the families of those who are in the system?
Oh, well, it destroys families. It tears the fabric of the family apart. It divides families. Families, when one is incarcerated, families will abandon that person. Families that they become isolated. There's a financial impact. They lose, a breadwinner. There's a tremendous economic impact. There's a social impact. Where did your husband go? Where is your father? Yeah. There's, like I said, the shame. It's a very big issue. 1 in 4 women, 1 in 4 have an incarcerated or a loved one in their family. That's a lot. So it's a silent issue. It breaks families apart.
Oh, yeah.
It even divides churches. When a church, when they get out. A lot of times what I will do with them is we will write an acceptance letter. We will say, let's write a letter to this church and say, you're getting out and you want to know when you get out, will you accept me? Because what we find when they get out and they're ready to meet up with their family back at church, they're not accepted. Yeah. So, and then that just turns them away, turns the families away. And not only that, let's talk about the children. The children are broken. The children don't have a father. The children of the incarcerated are 5 times more likely to be involved in the incarceration system. So it's a global problem in the sense that the family just destroys them. But what can bring them together is Jesus. What can bring them together is a church that says, we welcome you. A church like Bridgeway that says, come here. You can be welcome here. You are welcomed here.
Yeah. Now, Lance, I know that you personally have participated in a ministry that we have here at Bridgeway that ministers to the families of those who are incarcerated. You and your family have helped with delivering gifts and all that. What have you seen in that experience in terms of what families are going through and just how appreciative they are of support?
Yeah. Speaking of the Bridgeway Angels, right?
We got to get to that.
Yep. Yeah. And just explain the program, and I'll talk about my story real quick. So, Dan, explain how it works.
Okay. Well, Bridgeway Angels, Bridgeway Christian Church Prison Care is a lifeline of hope, offering unconditional love and support to the incarcerated and their families. And one of the ways that we do that is about 5 years ago, both Lane and I are chaplains in the Placer County Jail. We were able to form a partnership with our Placer County Jail in providing gifts for all the kids who have a mom or dad in jail. So what we've done for these last years is our church, our faithful church, that's a shout out to Bridgeway. We got coming around to the Bridgeway Angels. So make sure so we have let's see, I might just happen to have something here. Let's see here. Okay, we're on. Okay. Well,
we're live.
Okay, I have an angel. This angel, okay, you can't see this, I guess, but I have a homemade angel. And what this represents Bridgeway Angels. And what Bridgeway Angels is an opportunity for the church to minister to the children and the families. Yeah. The church gets them a gift, and then what we do, we go a step further, is we deliver that gift to the family. These are mostly unchurched people, not expecting anything. We come into their home, we deliver that gift, we bring them a gift bag, and in this case, one of our families who has an incarcerated loved one, designed these beautiful little angels. I guess we can't see them, but they're a beautiful angel.
Yeah.
Leave it to your imagination if you can't see it. So we deliver that, and we welcome them to church. We minister to them. And so we have teams. Last year, I think we had 30 different Bridgeway teams. And Pastor Lance has been one. Chaplain Lane and I have gone out a number of times. When we go out, we see brokenness. We see families that don't have electricity. We see families that are struggling. So it gives us a church to minister into their lives, to come into their lives through the Bridgeway Angels. Mm-hmm. Also, the Bridgeway Angels I got to get this in because this is an opportunity also as Bridgeway Angels grows. We're ministering to the homeless, our Gathering In children. Mm-hmm. Also children in schools that are impacted by incarceration. We last year partnered with our school across the street and were able to provide gifts working with the principal. This year we're already partnering with 3 different schools and many classrooms in difficult areas that have kids that are affected by incarceration. So we're going to get them gifts. We're going to minister to the families.
Awesome.
And I'm past my 90-second limit, but I want to get this in. I know you can't see it, but we also have a donor that gives an action Bible to everyone. So not only that, we're giving them a gift, but here's my Bridgeway thing here. But so we're
the
doing
Action
a lot.
Bible's awesome.
Yes.
So I got a chance to go out and deliver those gifts with our family, with my family personally. And I remember one of the areas we came in to an apartment complex, and we got a chance to go in there with the gifts. And there was a little guy that was in there that we were bringing gifts to, and his mom was there. So they invited us in. Once again, we thought we were going to drop off. And they were like, hey, well, come on in. Yeah. So we're in this little tiny apartment, and he was watching Rescue Dogs cartoons. It was awesome. And so I was like, hey, what are you watching? And I automatically, I love animals and cartoons, so it worked out great.
And kids.
Yeah. So we were doing very well together. But anyway, he actually wanted to open it right there while we were there. Now, we wanted to just leave it because, it wasn't the idea of, hey, open it in front of us and see, it was the idea, listen, we're just blessing you. You do whatever you want. But he got to open one, his mom. And when he opened it, just him immediately getting into playing with stuff and just looking around, that even though it was a relatively normal looking life, you could see hardship.
Yeah.
And this little guy just going, you know what? I have a toy rescue dog car, and I'm watching the show at the same time. It happened to be the same toy.
That's awesome.
Because a lot of times you get little indicators on what they like and stuff like that. And he immediately started playing, and he wanted to show me everything.
Yeah.
And it was just so cute. So anyway, that was just such an enriching environment.
Yeah, and just the opportunity to like you said, there's signs of hardship all over the place here, but we have the ability to come in, bring some joy, bring some hope, bring some excitement. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Now, another thing I want to touch on is there are inevitably those who are going to be fearful about churches in particular being too accepting of those who have criminal records. As you say, well, if we're too accepting, it opens us up to safety concerns and things of that nature. Yeah. What would you say to those who are fearful of having those with a criminal record involved in church? And then also, let's just be honest, steps do need to be taken. Yeah. What steps do churches need to take to balance accepting individuals who come and who have a record, while at the same time reducing potential safety risks? Yeah. Lane, why don't we start with you on that one?
Let me start by saying that every church has criminals, ex-felons, ex-cons. Yeah. They're in all of our churches. Yeah. Yep. You don't know about a lot of them, but they're in all of our churches, right? Yeah. I sat unknown in our church, and it wasn't until I decided to get involved in ministry and shared my testimony that this church knew, right? Right. Luckily, they were accepting of it. But again, they're everywhere. Yeah, we just don't know about them all, right? It's only the ones that are more public, that are...
And in our neighborhoods and in our workplaces.
Yeah. Yes. Some of their, some charges show up on websites, right? And, the church has the ability to go, hey, I think I recognize that guy. But for the most part, they're everywhere. Right. So, but I think, I would rather have some level of awareness in a church if I was a church, as opposed to not having a place that was like a beacon where they could go, oh, I can relate to that because I did just get out of jail, and there's something over there that kind of ministers to the jail, or at least some acknowledgement of acceptance in the church for people who have been incarcerated, some kind of beacon of hope. Yeah. If you don't provide that, you really have no way of knowing that they're in your church, and you get no opportunity to really address them and minister to them and to protect yourself, right? Yeah. So with Bridgeway, because everybody does know that you can come here and it's a safe place. Yep. For people that do come, we always find out what their charges are, and we address those accordingly, right? Yep. But there's a lot of churches that don't have the resources to do that. Right. And unfortunately, when they find out about certain charges, that may involve kids or whatever, they don't want them in the churches. And I've heard stories of they ask them to leave. Yeah. And that's okay if you really are a small church and you just don't have the resources to watch over that. There's no shame in that. Right. Where I think there's a breakdown and a little bit of responsibility is you need to partner with a church that does. Right. Get them to somebody that does have the resources to love on them and protect the body. Yeah. So.
And I'm grateful for the fact that, here at Bridgeway, we have volunteers have to be live scanned, right? Yeah. So anybody, especially if you're going to work with children, but really
that's how I got found out. No, I'm just kidding.
Anybody who's volunteering has to be live scanned, and that's so that if there's any sort of an issue that we're aware of that would put a child or another person in harm's way, we're aware of that situation, so that we might say to somebody with that sort of background, okay, in light of your background, we're not saying you're not accepted here. You can't be a part of the congregation, but it's not appropriate for you to maybe serve in these particular areas. But we have the resources to say, okay, in working with law enforcement, with working with the appropriate, going through the appropriate channels, we can figure out ways to say, okay, what is a way for you to be able to be involved and accepted here in a way that this can be a place where you can thrive and you can grow, and appropriate precautions are being taken for your own safety and the safety of others to make sure that we don't have incidents. And you're right, Lane, that not every church is able to do that, and we're certainly fortunate to be able to do that here.
I feel like we get a chance to have almost the best of both worlds, because I want to touch on the one that everybody tends to be most afraid of, and that's sex offenders. So we have registered sex offenders that attend Bridgeway and have attended in the past and things like that. And people go, oh my gosh, what does that mean? Well, honestly, sometimes it's because their whole family is here. Their children are here, and automatically you go, well, now you're never allowed to go to church again, and you can't ever be around your That doesn't make any sense. So what is so amazing about it is our processes. Our processes here. So first of all, we have a very robust security team. We have, whether it's military or ex-military or officers or probation officer. I mean, these are our teams. And so we are a very, very safe environment. Then we have these processes where if somebody is a registered sex offender, they actually go through a process to notify us. And we go through a whole system to where we know exactly what's going on. We're able to help them be encouraged and monitored. There's accountability everywhere. We constantly have surveillance. You know what I mean? So we couldn't be a more safe place.
That's right.
But what that does is it allows us to invite in people that have gone through things. One of the things, and I won't go too long into the sex offender piece of it, but I've had friends in my life that have walked down that road, and watching I'm not going to ever excuse the sin that they were involved in, but watching them pay for it for 20, 30, 40 years is intense. And you go, that is the last group that is considered the unforgivable.
That's right.
Right? I mean, and so the idea that the church would go, hold on, I get it. You know what? None of us are okay with it. However, our Jesus says, and then you can go into a whole nother place and go, we have designed a safe place of engagement where our congregation is not in danger.
That's right.
But at the same time, you can be loved on. Dan, I felt like I cut you off.
No, you didn't. You explained it better than I could. But that goes back to over 10 years ago and working with this ministry, working with Pastor Russ, and looking at the most important thing in our ministry is the safety of our children, the safety of our church, and how do we keep them safe and also welcome those such as 290 registered sex offenders. And like Pastor Lance said, our church did an amazing job. One of our leaders on our leadership team, Heidi Coffran, developed a security protocol. So when we have someone that is a 290 registrant, we have a protocol to say, instead of saying, no, we're not going to accept you, we have a whole protocol. We meet with them. I get in contact with their probation officer and say, okay, they're going to come to church. And so here's what we're going to do. Here's the plan that we have. We will meet them in the parking lot. They will not be alone for one moment here at church. We meet them in the parking lot. We bring them in. We sit right next to them at church. We ensure that they don't go to the bathroom. They don't leave anywhere. They don't go anywhere. But they have that opportunity to go to church. They have that protocol, because ultimately we're not going to do anybody any good if we put our children at risk. And I can say, having been in many of those meetings, they are, for the most part, very grateful for that, because we have a plan. So we're saying, you matter, and here's why you matter. We're going to have an intentional program and welcome you, and it has been very effective. I'm very grateful to Heidi for what she's done in putting that plan together.
Absolutely. It's benefit to the individuals, in addition to it providing safety for the congregation.
And they're probation officers, so when I'm contacting them, we're getting updates, and so it has a very positive impact.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so one of the last topics I want to hit on here is this topic of recidivism. And Dan, you brought it up earlier. I mean, this has been a hot topic for a long time. A lot of different people talking about it. And just for those who aren't familiar with the term, the idea that individuals who are in the system get released back into society and wind up back in jail. That's the concept of, or in prison. It's the concept of recidivism. I did some research trying to find some numbers, and it depends who you talk to, what the exact percentage is, but it is a large percentage of individuals who come out of prison or jail and wind up back in. So my two questions that I'd love to hear kind of you guys speak to, and maybe Lane, you could start. Sure. Number one, why? Why is there such a high recidivism rate? And then number two, how are churches positioned to help reduce that?
Yeah. Well, and we've talked about this a little bit throughout the day, but for me, I think it has a lot to do with the personal touch when the person gets out, right? Men or women, right? Yeah. They have to have a place that they can go to. They've been maybe taught through Bible study behind the walls, right? But when they get out, as Dan mentioned, right, a lot of churches are not open to that. A lot of people personally are not willing to spend time investing in them. Yeah. And they've been taught hope on the other side of the walls, but when they get out, they don't see hope. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So they've been taught about it. They've heard about this Jesus who loves them, and they've heard about the church who's welcoming and open, but they're not really seeing it, right? Yeah. And what I mean by that is someone coming alongside them, because a lot of these folks, as we talked about, didn't have the same upbringings that the four of us were blessed with, right? Yeah. They didn't have the opportunity to be raised in a proper way, so they don't really have hope. And if you don't have training and you don't have hope and you don't have somebody who's pointing you and showing you the way, and it's the basics, right? It's not that they don't know who Jesus is by the time they get out. Most of these guys have been through some kind of a jail service, right? They have the idea of who Jesus is, but they don't know how to walk out day-to-day life, right? Yeah. It's easy for them to say, well, come into my church and we'll teach you about Jesus. That's like going to a homeless place and going, I'm not bringing any food. I'm just going to tell you about Jesus, and then I'm going to go home. Not that wouldn't be awesome,
sure,
but you have a better chance of
food.
If you feed them first and then try to tell them about Jesus. It's the same concept with the inmate, right? Yeah. You can tell them about Jesus, but if you don't walk out who Jesus is in front of them and show them how they can do things differently, and that's a lot of work.
Yeah. And the help with the practical skill, getting a job, doing all these different things.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's kind of like feeding the homeless, right? I mean, you got to minister to their basic needs, and that's a lot of work, right? It means personal involvement, from a church or an individual. But I think that's where we fall short is we talk about Jesus, but we don't show them Jesus, right?
Yeah. So, Dan, what are your thoughts on this?
Yes, the first 72 hours are critical when they get out. The recidivism rate is the highest then, because when they get out, there's nothing there. There's nobody there. Right. So we want to, like Lane said, we want to be there. We want to fellowship with them, eat. Right. And that's where I look for that opportunity to just sit down with them right when they get out and say, hey, you're out now, just to come alongside them, to be someone to pray with, to be someone that's real with them, to say, I got you. And then also what we do, with the recidivism, like Len says, they're looking for a job, they're looking for housing, they're looking to meet their probation requirements, they're looking to restore their family. And so at the heart of all that is that relationship with God and seeing it acted out through people. In other words, I tell them, so when you get here, text me and I'm going to sit with you. I'm going to be with you, just to be there for them, to eat with them, to love on them. And it sounds simple, but it's so critical. We have so many that are in need, and yet it's like Lane said, it's difficult for people to make that investment, but we need to do that. We need to do that, and we do that here. We do that.
Can I add one thing? So it's not always a personal investment too, because it might sound really daunting what we're describing, right? Sure. I'm going to spend like 3 or 4 nights a week with this guy, and it's going to take up all my time, right? You are going to have to spend some time with the individual, right, guy or girl. But if you just get connected to resources, you can point them to a lot of places, and if they're wanting it, right, and that's the key, they can get help even on their own, but you need to be able to guide them to shelters, to food, to resources, job training, and they're out there. Right. You just have to do a little bit of research. We've done that here at Bridgeway. Happy to share that with anybody, but it's not something that you have to personally take on your own, right? And make sure that you tell them, you take them to these places, or make sure that they learn about these access that they have. Right. It's just a simple guide that we have here at Bridgeway, just because we did a little bit of research on where they can go for basic needs.
And I just have to assume, that resourcing component is so critical.
Huge.
And it's probably not intuitive if you're fresh out of jail on this, what do I do now?
No, yeah.
The resources are there. It's just making that connection can be a little bit of a challenge. Yeah. Lance, what are your thoughts on this? Just being someone who's not, you're leading a church. You're not in prison ministry to the extent that these guys are, but you interact with a lot of individuals who have this background. What are some ways in your mind that the church can contribute to kind of health for those who have been in prison or jail?
Yeah, well, even just addressing the issue of why the recidivism, let me just add one more piece to that. If challenge was part of what caused the felony or the conviction. Let's say, for example, it was a lack of skills or it was a lack of economics that led them to start selling drugs.
Right.
If it was challenge that led them to get in, it's harder when they get out.
Yeah.
And if challenge was what led to it, your challenge is even more intense.
It is.
Yeah.
Because just picture this. Everyone that is listening or watching this right now, picture you're out of jail right now. What do you do?
Yep.
I can guarantee you have no clue
Right.
what your next step is.
Right.
Yep.
And you go, well, there's a lot of things available. Yeah, they're not looking at them.
Yep.
Like, where is that list? It's not like they get handed a whole packet as they leave out and go,
right.
here's everything to set up your new life.
Right.
There's none of that. And I think that's where the church can step in. The other thing is I think it deals with a lot like with homelessness, is that there's a reason why someone is homeless.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it's an inability to have life skills.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If the inability to have life skills got you in the situation, it's going to be really hard once you get out. It didn't get easier.
That's right.
And so all of a sudden, how are you supposed to follow up on your probation if you didn't have great life skills to make appointments before?
Yeah.
Now all of a sudden you got all these demands and you're still not very good at life skills.
Yeah. Yep.
You didn't develop them in prison.
Yeah.
So now all of a sudden you got to do all this stuff. The other thing is we literally have people in prison for selling marijuana. And now it's legal. Now everybody's
Why
making
couldn't it come
money.
along later? I could have come along later, right?
That's what I'm saying. Like, I mean, because now it's legal, and suddenly everybody's selling it for profit, and it's all cool. But there's people in prison for the exact same sales.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That whole thing just mind-boggling to me.
Yeah.
But you were talking about how the church can do it. In my opinion, the resource element of if there's ever a way we can say you're getting out, and the first thing you feel is fear.
Yeah.
That there's a person to look you in the eye and say, I think we can figure it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think if there's anything that we can do that's powerful there, that would be the sheer presence and go, I actually do have a little packet and the packet has a bunch of resources.
Yeah.
I'm not saying you have to come hang out at church and now you got to follow Christians around. What I'm saying is I'm here to bless you. That's
right.
As you start your new life, I just want you to know that I, on behalf of Jesus, want to bless you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here's a little bit to get started with. If we even just had a packet that said, here is some money, here is some resources, here is some ideas, and we have an open door.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you need us, we're here.
Yeah.
I feel like that's a family element that we can bring in.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, that's up, and the church is uniquely positioned, I think, to provide that, not only in terms of physical resources, but kind of relational resources,
Right.
That's right.
as well. So as we're pretty much out of time here, as we start to wrap up, I would just love to hear. I mean, you guys, once again, you're on the front lines. Could you maybe each share one quick kind of God story, whether it's from recently or in the past, of just ways that you've seen God work through your personal engagement with prison ministry?
Yeah. I already mentioned one story, right,
Yeah,
about the
which was
individual,
awesome.
and there's countless stories over the last 12 years of guys that we've worked with, Dan and I both. But one just recently was a guy who got out, 290 registrant, and a lot of difficulty in reestablishing himself back into society because, believe it or not, there isn't a lot of places that'll take a guy like that. There's no shelters, there's nothing, right? So
You're cut off of everything.
from everything. So I actually reached out to Dan on this one, and I'm like, where do we send these guys? I couldn't get him into any shelter in town. I tried, right? We ended up partnering with Union Gospel Mission and getting him into a program there that did accept 290 registrants. And fast forward, right, I've spent about a year now, I think, since I started working with this guy. I just met for dinner once a week and invested in him and just kept pointing to the resources like we've talked about, about this is where you can go if you need that. Oh, you need shelter. Here's where you can go.
Yep.
That one took a while to figure out.
Yeah.
But also pointed him towards resources for employment. There's the Sacramento street team down in Sacramento that takes in anybody and everybody if you're willing to work, and they give you gift cards,
wow.
for a day's work, and you can go out and buy food at Safeway and different things. So,
wow.
so just spending time with that guy for about a year, didn't take that long. It took about 3 or 4 months to really get him established, but being willing to resource him, like we've been talking about, right? Get him to the right places. It didn't take me a ton of time because I had the resource packet, like Matt's mentioned, available to me. I just had to figure out to the right place to point him. Fast forward to today, the guy is living in his own apartment now. He's supporting himself. He's going back to community college, getting retrained in a job program so he could do something that would be useful and meaningful.
Yeah.
And he's doing great things.
Awesome.
He's still struggling every single day,
Yeah.
because he's 290 registrant.
Yep.
But he is moving forward.
Yeah.
Not an easy life.
No.
Nope.
But he is moving forward.
I mean,
he
which
is
is
contributing to society.
Yeah.
He's doing the right things, and he's making an effort. And it didn't take a whole lot of time or effort on my part. So,
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Praise God.
Dan, how
Praise
about
God.
you?
Well, I had something recent happen to me. I don't think I mentioned, but one of the other big things that we do in prison care is we have pen pals. We write letters, and those have a profound impact because those are shared all throughout. And so, as I mentioned as we began the podcast, that I came to this ministry through my work as a child welfare social worker, and one of those young men had many years ago committed a crime. And he was in juvenile hall, and after he left juvenile hall, he was transferred to the Sacramento County Jail. And I felt God put on my heart just to continue to visit him. So I would go and visit him, and I thought, as I talked to him, he wasn't a believer, but I felt like God was saying to me, this is representative of so many that are nameless, that nobody knows this kid. This kid was in foster care. This kid is going to go to prison. This kid has a life sentence. Yeah. And so how can I help him, God? What can I do? And so what I did, this is about 6.5 years ago. The last time I saw him, and I know that we don't have a camera, I guess I wanted to say document cam shot, but I guess we don't have that.
Right.
We have to step up our game.
Sounds cool, though.
Yes, it does. So 6.5 years ago, actually 2,345 days ago, the last time I saw him, I was visiting him at the Sacramento County Jail, and he had been sentenced, and he was going to the state prison. And I didn't think I would, I assumed I would never see him again. And so I said, after that, I went out and I sat in my truck, and I said, God, I will never forget him. I will never forget him because you never forget me. You never forget anybody. Your arm reaches anywhere. You will go anywhere. And so I said, God, I'm going to remember him. I'm going to pray for him every day. Every day.
Wow.
And so, and that was 6.5 years ago. So you cannot see it, or maybe we can, but this is a screenshot of my phone. And on my phone, I have one reminder, and it's him. Every day, I want to wake up, and this is 6.5 years ago, and say, God, I'm praying for him. I'm praying for all of them that are lost because I know you love him. So every day, as a matter of fact, for 2,345 days.
That's right.
That's almost 6.5 years. Every day I had him. I prayed for him. Well, not recently in our prison ministry, I got a letter, and I looked at the letter. I'm holding it up for those. I guess we don't see that, but just for you guys.
Thank you.
This is a prison letter that was received, and it's addressed to me. It says Bridgeway Christian Church, attention, Dan Gamel. And I looked up at the name, and I saw this name. It's this guy from 6.5 years ago. Now, I never heard from him. He didn't know where I was. He didn't even know at that time. I didn't even go into prison ministry. But he sends me a letter, and I thought, how can this be, God? And I look at my phone, and I'm like, yeah, that's him. And so let me show you what one thing will do. And I'm going to read the letter. Actually, I'm going to let Pastor Lance, his radio voice, is going to kick it. This is the letter.
And when did you get this letter, Dan?
And this is a couple months ago here to our church.
Really recently.
So after 6.5 years, I pray for him every day. I remember him every day. I get this letter. I don't know him, that he knows, he doesn't know the situation. This is the letter I received from him.
All right,
here we go. Dear Dan, it has been a long time since we last spoke. I hope you still remember me. I really just want to thank you for the support you showed me when I was in county jail. I had no one then, and you came out of nowhere to put money on my books, and you visited me. I don't think I ever really thanked you properly, so thank you. You were a godsend at that point in my life, and I will never forget that. You are probably wondering how I found your church, right? One of my friends here named Shane, his wife goes there, and he says he knows you really well. We were talking, and your name came up, and I don't want to take up any more of your time, Dan. I really just wanted to say thank you. So thank you. I hope you have a wonderful life. Your friend.
Wow. That's being obedient to the Holy Spirit right there. Right?
Man, come on.
He wrote the letter.
So this
That's
is
cool.
a couple things. One, when you go into jail, this individual was a discipleship leader in our D tank. We had a discipleship team, upper tier and lower tier. This man Shane, was in our tank at Placer County Jail, and he was transferred to prison. And so in his time in prison, he is reaching out.
Yeah.
He is sharing with people, and he's on the yard there at Jamestown, and he just happens to be talking. I guess my name comes up in that kind of company. I don't know what that says about me.
Right.
I'm in good company there on the prison yard. But
Yes.
so my name came up on the prison yard, and this this young man from all those years ago said, wait, I remember that guy. And so he writes me this letter. And I want to tell you, it's this letter, it's the things like this that says, whatever you do, the one thing you do, you might not know. It may be 2,345 days later, but if you're faithful, God is even more faithful. And so I can tell you that I found out in inquiring a little bit more that this young man, now in his 20s, he's serving a life sentence. And he is a believer. I asked Shane, well, what happened? Was he going to church and he was inviting him? And he said, well, not at first. But then he said, I went to church and he was there. I went to church and he's there all the time. Wow. So I just want to say that if it's been 2,345 days, if it's been 10 years or 20 years, God is faithful. That whatever you do for the least of these, God is going to honor, and God will find a way to show you. So here I show you today that God is faithful, that whatever you do, He is faithful and He is good and He will redeem. I mean, He's just wonderful. So this ministry is a ministry of redemption. It's a ministry of hope. It's a ministry that says, God, you never forget me. Yeah. And so I just bring that to your attention.
That's awesome.
So that we all know. And so for those of you that are listening, for those of you that have a family member that's incarcerated, for those of you that are struggling as you listen to this podcast, for the pain that this podcast brings up, you're thinking about your mother or your father or your children in jail, I want you to know that God is faithful. Amen. I want you to know that He is there with you.
Wow. Yep.
And He will never leave you, and He loves you.
Amen.
Wow. Amen, amen,
incredible
amen.
story.
Unbelievable. It gave me goosebumps listening to that. Just incredible, cool. Amazing. Last thing, and Dan, you kind of you teed this up perfectly. For those who either are saying, man, I want to get in the game, I want to get involved in serving, or those that say, hey, I've got a family member or a loved one in the system and would love some support. How do they get in touch with you guys? How do they get in touch with Bridgeway Prison Care?
Well, they can get in touch with us here at Bridgeway. We have our prison care. They can reach out to me directly. I'm Dan Gamel, and you can reach out to me by email at prisoncare@bridgewaychurch.org.
Oh, hang on. prisoncare@bridgeway.church.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
prisoncare@bridgeway.church. If you're sending an email, I want to make sure it gets to the right place. That's prisoncare@bridgeway.church.
All right. Thank you, Pastor Brian. And they can also get more information from our Facebook page, our Prison Care Facebook page, where we have information. And they can also come on the second Sunday of the month, which is here. It's coming up. We have our family support meeting here at church for the family members. And so we meet right upstairs in room 2 on Sundays, on the second Sunday a month at 1 o'clock. If you have a family member, a loved one that's incarcerated, if you're looking for support, you could show up there. You could reach out to me. And you could just come to the church and talk to anyone, say, hey, I want to talk to Dan and our chaplain Lane, and we will come and we will be there for you.
Yeah. Awesome. So that second Sunday meeting, it's open to anybody.
Yes.
Just show up if that would be a blessing to you. 1 o'clock upstairs, classroom 2 here at Bridgeway.
Yes.
All right. Wow. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for coming in today, being a part of this. Thank you, more importantly, for the work that you do and just the way that you're impacting lives. Really, really appreciate the work you do and you guys sharing with us. Thank you, Lance, of course, for being part of the show.
Yeah.
As always, want to say thanks to Lucian, Montana, Brenton, all you guys for making us look good and sound good, or at least look and sound as good as we can. We appreciate you guys very much. Thanks to all of you for listening. We'll be back in 2 weeks for another episode of the Engaging Culture Podcast. We'll see you then.
Thank you for listening to Engaging Culture, a podcast by Bridgeway Christian Church. If you enjoyed this show, please consider subscribing and leaving a review on iTunes. Thank you so much for listening. Music is used under the Creative Commons license and is provided by Dexter Britton.